The sky over the Martian frontier settlement of dust was the color of a fresh bruise, a perpetual twilight choked by the particulate legacy of the great Terran exodus. The air tasted of rust and recycled regret. I moved through the grimy corridors of the outpost's lower decks not as a man, but as a weapon that had forgotten its war. They called me Kale, a clipped, sharp sound, suitable for a former Terran shock trooper. My body was a latticework of synth fiber muscle and scar tissue, my mind a locked vault where the echoes of artillery fire had long since replaced any coherent thought. I existed. I followed orders. I endured. The mantra of the broken soldier. My current orders were simple: patrol the perimeter of the scrap rings, the lawless belt of derelict ships and pirate havens that orbited the settlement. It was a punishment detail. I had exhibited excessive autonomy during a bar fight, a clinical way of saying I dismantled 3 smugglers who thought a veteran's silence was a sign of weakness. The weakness they perceived was an illusion. I had destroyed that soft, feeling self years ago, in the phosphorus fires of Proxima Centauri. What remained was a chassis of cold purpose. A man who destroys his own weakness can never be truly destroyed by others. He becomes something else. Something less, and infinitely more. The scanner on my wrist pad chirped a discordant note, an energy spike inconsistent with the ambient radiation of the scrap fields. It came from the wreck of the Celestial Envoy, a pre-Exodus luxury liner now gutted and haunted. Probably just a scavenger crew running a hot torch. Protocol demanded I investigate and report. I moved with the predatory silence my augments afforded, slipping through a ruptured airlock into the cathedral-like desolation of the ship's grand concourse. The air was colder here, smelling of ozone and old death. Then, I heard it, not the clang of tools, but the wet, meaty sounds of impact, and low, guttural laughter. Peering over a shattered data terminal, I saw them. 4 figures in patchwork armor, their backs to me, clustered around a smaller shape on the ground. Raiders. And they weren't scavenging parts. Their victim was an alien. A Xylosian. I'd seen their kind in intelligence briefings, a reclusive, argon-based lifeform from the Gelatus Nebula, humanoid but elongated, with skin the translucent blue of glacier ice and hair like strands of spun silver. They were pacifists, philosophers, said to communicate through bioluminescent patterns and soft chimes. A rare sight this deep in Terran space. Sheathed, the morphology suggested it, was curled tight, her luminescence flickering erratically with each blow. One raider held a crude shock prod, its arcs leaving sizzling black marks on her skin. Another was prying at a delicate crystal lattice she wore around her neck, likely a cultural or psionic focus. "Come on, sing for us, Frosty," the raider with the prod sneered. "Heard your kind can make a man see paradise with those little chimes. Or hell. Don't matter which to me." A coldness settled in my gut, a different cold than the void of my existence. This was not a tactical situation. This was predation. My orders said nothing about interspecies conflict in derelicts. My programming suggested tactical withdrawal. But the thing I had forged myself into in the fires of war, the unfeeling weapon, perceived a target. The raiders were a flaw in the operational environment. A threat to stability. That was the logic I used, the only language my shattered self understood. I didn't announce myself. The first raider died when my combat knife, thrown with augmented precision, buried itself to the hilt in his neck. The second spun, raising a rivet gun, but I was already inside his guard. I seized his wrist and snapped the radius and, although with a sound like dry twigs, driving the bone shards into his own chest with the force of my thrust. Efficiency. Dismantling. The third got a shot off. A searing line of plasma grazed my ribs, cooking synth flesh and real nerve endings alike. The pain was data, a tactical readout. I closed the distance, took his head in my hands, and ended his threat with a sharp, clockwise twist. The leader, the one with the shock prod, stared, his bravado evaporating. He looked from his dead comrades to me, my face impassive, smoke curling from the burn on my side. "Shock trooper," he breathed, a curse and a recognition. He dropped the prod and ran, clattering into the darkness. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the drip of fluids and the low hum of dying ship systems. I retrieved my knife, wiped it clean, and turned to leave. My duty was done. The anomaly was neutralized. A sound stopped me. Not a chime, not a song. A whisper. It formed in the air, not in my ears but, in my mind, clear and, cold and, terrifyingly fragile, yet slicing through my mental armor like it was tissue paper. Do not, leave me, in the dark. I froze. Telepathy. The briefings had hinted at it, but, this was direct, unmediated. It wasn't language, but, meaning itself, imbued with a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical vacuum. I looked back. The Xylosian girl had uncurled slightly. One eye, the color of liquid sapphire, watched me. Her luminescence was guttering, like a candle in a storm. The crystal around her neck was cracked. She was dying. The shock prod had disrupted her argon-based biology, freezing her from the inside out. Leaving her here was not tactically unsound, it was the logical conclusion. She was non-Terran, non-asset, dying. Yet the whisper echoed. In the dark. I knew that dark. It was the dark inside my own skull, after the stims wore off and the memories played. It was the dark of a life pod drifting after my troop carrier was destroyed. I had clawed my way out of that dark by forging myself into something hard and relentless. She had no such recourse. Cursing inwardly, a flicker of emotion that felt alien to me, I moved to her side. My med scanner was calibrated for human biology. It registered her vitals as a cascade of failures. The only chance, a stupid, illogical chance, was to get her to the outpost's med bay. It would require explaining the dead raiders. It would violate non-interference directives. It was a risk with no strategic payoff. I slid my arms under her. She was light, almost weightless, and cold as space. Her form seemed to lean into my warmth, a reflexive seeking of energy. Her whisper brushed my mind again, weaker this time, a mere thought breeze. The song is breaking. Hold on to it, I grunted, the words rough from disuse, as I began the arduous trek back to the airlock. Getting her into dust was an exercise in controlled threat. I bypassed the main gate, using a forgotten maintenance conduit known only to the desperate and the damned. The few who saw me, a hulking shock trooper cradling a dying alien, melted away, unwilling to invite my gaze. The med bay was run by a weary, middle-aged surgeon named Rel. His eyes widened behind his opti-scanners as I laid the Xylosian on a procedure table. Kale, what in the seven hells argon-based lifeform? Cryogenic trauma from an electrical weapon. Stabilize her. I'm a human doctor. I don't know their physiology. Figure it out. My tone left no room for argument. I stood, a bloodied, smoking statue of implied violence, my presence a guarantee that he would try. Rel worked with frantic, terrified ingenuity, hooking her to a modified atmospheric regulator, flooding a quarantine pod with chilled argon mix. I stood guard at the door, my senses extended, listening for the inevitable approach of authority. The burn on my side ached. The girl's whispers had stopped. The silence in my head was once again my own, and it felt larger. They came an hour later. Commander Jax, head of outpost security, flanked by 2 armored enforcers. Jax was a political animal, all polished insignia and calculated concern. Kale, he said, his voice smooth. You've caused a significant incident. 4 dead in the envoy. And, you've brought a xenocontaminant into my secure facility. They were executing a sentient being, I stated, the words feeling strange. I intervened. Your jurisdiction ends at the outpost wall. You were on patrol, not a crusade. Jax's eyes flicked to the medpod. The Xylosian collective is insular, but they have treaties. If she dies here, it could be an interstellar incident. If she lives, what she might say is unpredictable. The cleanest solution is to hand her over to the Frontier Council for debriefing. I knew what debriefing meant for a fragile telepath. It would be a dissection, mental and physical. They'd mine her thoughts for any scrap of nebulous intel and discard the shell. She stays under Rel's care, I said, my voice low. Jax's smile was thin. That's not your call, soldier. Your actions already border on dereliction. Stand aside. The two enforcers stepped forward. They were big, armed with stun batons and neural disruptors. Good for crowd control. But I was not a crowd. I was what remained when a human soul was scraped out and replaced with ceramite and cold fury. I had destroyed the part of me that felt fear, that hesitated, that valued self-preservation over mission completion. In this moment, my mission, self-assigned and irrational, was her survival. The fight was short, brutal, and utterly one-sided. I broke the first enforcer's arm and used his body as a shield against the other's disruptor fire. I disarmed the second and left him choking on the floor with a precisely applied nerve strike. I stood before Jax, who had drawn his sidearm. I didn't move to take it. I just looked at him. You are making a catastrophic error, Kale, Jax hissed, the gun wavering. The error was yours, I replied, the emptiness in my voice more terrifying than any shout. You assumed I was still a soldier who took orders. I am not. I am the consequence of those orders. Now leave. Tell your council that the girl is under my protection. If they want her, they can come through me. The sheer, suicidal audacity of it stunned him. He was a man who understood chains of command, political cost-benefit analyses. I operated on a simpler calculus, threat versus objective. He was a threat. He was now neutralized. He backed out, dragging his enforcers with him. The outpost was placed under quiet lockdown. I was a mutineer, a rogue element. Rel worked in terrified silence, monitoring the alien girl. Her biosigns are stabilizing, he muttered one cycle later. But it's like she's retreated. The trauma, it's deep. Not just physical. I took to sitting beside her medpod during the long, silent watches. I had no idea why. Perhaps it was because protecting her was the only objective I had left in a life devoid of purpose. One night, as the external lights the Martian night, her whisper returned to my mind, stronger now, a thread of sound in the void. You are loud. I blinked, looking at her still form. Me? Loud? Your silence, the whisper clarified. It screams. It is a fortress with storms raging inside. No one had ever perceived the war inside me. Psychiatrists had tried and failed. She had simply listened to the emptiness and heard the echo of the pain that had created it. I didn't know how to respond. I had no practice in mental conversation, in vulnerability. Why did they attack you? I thought, aiming the question at her. A wave of sorrow, poignant and pure, washed over me. They sought the song of home. The crystal, it is a memory archive. The song of my world's resonance. They thought it a weapon or a drug. It is only beauty. Now it is cracked. The song is incomplete. I looked at the cracked lattice, now placed on a tray beside her pod. A memory of beauty. I understood memories as ghosts that haunted. The concept of one being a treasure to protect was foreign. Days passed. The Frontier Council did not send a battalion. They sent a negotiator, a slick functionary who offered me pardons, reinstatement, even a bounty for the safe transfer of the subject. I stood silent, my refusal an immovable object. The standoff was a tense, silent war of attrition. Then, the girl, she told me her name was Ilara, spoke of the raider leader who had escaped. He carries a fragment of the crystal. A shard. It bleeds our song into the void. It calls to dark things. It must be recovered. Or silenced. It was a new objective. A tactical necessity. I suited up, armed myself not just with blades and a sidearm, but with a portable argon scrubber and a stasis box Rel rigged. Ilara's consciousness, still too weak to leave the pod, formed a faint, guiding link, a gentle pull toward the dissonant echo of her stolen song shard. I found the raider in the deepest, most rotten heart of the scrap rings, in a pressurized burrow built into the carcass of a freighter. He had tried to sell the shard, but its psychic resonance had driven his potential buyers mad with whispering visions. Now he was alone, paranoid, the shard glowing with a sickly light on a table before him. He was half mad himself, babbling about ice melodies and frozen eyes. He saw me and screamed, firing a wild spray of flechettes. I took two on the shoulder, the impact like hammer blows. I didn't slow. He was a malfunction. I was the tool for correction. I ended him quickly, almost mercifully. The shard hummed in my hand, cold and plaintive. As I placed it in the stasis box, Ilara's presence in my mind sighed with relief, and then, with sudden, sharp alarm. Kale. They are here. For the song. For us. I rushed back, the flechettes in my shoulder a distant nuisance. The outpost was in chaos. Alarms blared. Jax, it seemed, had cut a deal. Not with the Council, but with a third party, the Crothian Marauders, a mercenary band with a reputation for xenocide. They were a blunt instrument, deniable and ruthless. Jax had given them access, and, in the ensuing pirate raid, a problematic alien and a rogue trooper would be tragically eliminated. The lower decks were a war zone. Marauders in hulking powered armor advanced, laying down suppressive fire. Outpost security, either complicit or overwhelmed, was crumbling. Rel was dead, shot outside his lab. The medbay doors were sealed, but heavy plasma cutters were already scarring the alloy. Ilara's pod was open. She stood, leaning against a console, her form wavering but her eyes clear. She was the source of the song, and, now, with the shard nearby, she was a beacon. The Marauders weren't just here to kill, they were here to capture the source of this strange, potent psionic artifact. You must go, I said, my voice flat. The rear vent conduit. I will hold them. They will kill you, her thought was a spike of pure anguish. That is the function of a shield. No. The force of her mental cry was staggering. For the first time, it was not a whisper, but a clear, ringing tone in the prison of my mind. You are not a tool. You are Kale. You feel. I have heard the echoes of your heart behind the fortress walls. You grieve. You rage. You chose to save me. Her words were a psychic battering ram against my defenses. And, in that moment, as the door glowed white-hot, I felt it. The storm she had heard. The grief for my lost squad, the rage at the machinery of war that had chewed us up and spat me out, the aching, human loneliness I had buried under mountains of discipline and fury. I had not destroyed my weak self. I had entombed it. And she had been listening to its screams all along. I was not an unfeeling weapon. I was a wounded man who had chosen, in a derelict ship, to act with a shred of forgotten compassion. That was not weakness. It was the one part of my humanity that had refused to die. The door exploded inward. A Crothian marauder filled the frame, his plasma cannon whining to full charge, aimed at Ilara. There was no time for tactical consideration, only instinct. I did not throw myself in front of the bolt. That would have been a waste. Instead, I moved toward the marauder, inside the arc of his cannon, my remaining hand closing on a discarded medical laser scalpel. The plasma shot seared past me, melting the wall where Ilara had been a second before. I drove the scalpel up, through the armor's armpit joint, into the meat within, and triggered it to full power. The marauder convulsed and fell. But there were more behind him. I was out of ammunition, one arm useless, facing down 4 barrels. I positioned myself between them and Ilara, a final, futile barrier. Then, Ilara sang. It was not a sound for the ears. It was a wave of psionic energy, pure and unfiltered, emanating from her and the now reassembled crystal lattice around her neck. It was the song of home, not a weapon, but a truth. A truth of icy, pristine oceans, of communal minds linked in gentle harmony, of a profound, peaceful beauty. It was the absolute antithesis of the violent, greedy hunger in the room. The wave hit the marauders. Their aggression, their malice, it was a brittle shell. The song did not attack it, it simply revealed its emptiness. The men staggered, their weapons dropping. One fell to his knees, weeping for a childhood he had obliterated. Another clutched his head, screaming as the song showed him the mirrored horror of his own actions. They were not physically harmed, but their will to fight was shattered, dissolved in the face of an unbearable, beautiful truth. The song washed over me as well. It did not break me, because I was already broken. Instead, it flowed into the cracks. It did not silence the storms of grief and rage, but it cooled them, showing them for what they were, not weaknesses, but testaments. Proof I had cared, that I could still care. The frozen sea inside me began, slowly, to thaw. Silence returned, thick and stunned. The marauders were catatonic or fleeing. Jax, who had been at the rear, stared, his face a mask of utter incomprehension. He saw not a weapon or an asset, but a power that rendered his scheming meaningless. Ilara collapsed, the effort exhausting her last reserves. I caught her, ignoring the shrieking pain in my shoulder. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The Frontier Council, scrambling to contain the interstellar and public relations disaster, arrived in force. They found a broken security commander, pacified mercenaries, a dead doctor, a wounded hero, and a Xylosian girl who had, with a single psychic broadcast, done the impossible. For her song had not been confined to the med bay. In her moment of desperate, full-power transmission, it had bled through the outpost's dampeners and into the local net. A garbled, breathtaking fragment of it had been picked up by a passing comms buoy and relayed across the system. The Dust Whisper, they called it. A raw, unmediated transmission of alien consciousness, of peace, of memory, of profound, non-aggressive sentience. It went viral across the data spheres of humanity. It was analyzed, debated, wept to. It shattered the xenophobic narrative of alien threat the frontier authorities had cultivated. It was, quite simply, HFY not humanity, fuck yeah, but something subtler and more powerful, humanity, finding you. Finding a mirror in the cosmos that reflected not a threat but a lost capacity for wonder. I was debriefed by very serious people from very high up. I told them the truth, stripped bare. They saw the unshakable veteran and the fragile alien and the inexplicable bond that had defied all protocol. With public sentiment a tidal wave in our favor, they had no choice. I was given a full pardon, a medal I never wanted, and a discharge on medical grounds. Ilara was granted protected refugee status, with me named as her sworn guardian, a quaint, ancient title that held surprising legal weight. We left Dust on a sleek diplomatic cutter, headed for a neutral station where the Xylosian Collective had agreed to send an envoy. Standing at the viewport, watching the rusty orb of Mars recede, I felt her presence beside me, not in my mind, but a quiet comfort in the air. Your silence is quieter now, she whispered mentally. The storms are settling, I acknowledged aloud, a strange, unfamiliar feeling of peace seeping into my bones. What will your people say? They will thank you. And they will ask me to come home. A pang, sharp and human, struck me. Will you go? She turned her sapphire eyes to me. In them, I saw not just the eyes of her world, but the reflection of the stars and my own scarred face. My song is here now, she thought, her meaning flowing into me. It is woven with your silence. They are both part of a new melody. A quieter one. A stronger one. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. But I had learned a greater truth, the man who integrates his broken pieces, who accepts the grief and the rage as part of his strength, who allows a crack of compassion into his armor, that man becomes something else entirely. Not a weapon. Not a fortress. But a bridge. Between war and peace. Between solitude and connection. Between a scream of rage and a whisper of song that could, if only for a moment, shock a jaded world into remembering what it meant to be alive, to be human, and to not be alone in the dark.